So, this is Zenith, as it exists within the end of its launch version. I say end of its launch version, within pretty much all of the major tweaks done to it that seem to be planned for the next while. And I would be surprised to see another major update for quite a bit, given the size of the team and the size of the updates that need to be made from this point on. So I think this is as good a time as any to give my final thoughts on Zenith as it exists right now. And let's get into it. There are a couple main points that I want to hit when talking about this. And the first point that I want to hit is, should this game have launched in the state that it's in right now? And I've seen a number of people asking this in sort of general discussions. And I have to say that I think my answer to that question is not really. And I think that comes down to a couple different factors for me. The first of which is the way that the game has been presented to people. When you look at Steam, for instance, Steam makes it very clear that this is an early access game. That you shouldn't go into this expecting this to be Zenith as it exists in its final form, as it exists in some sort of live service homeostasis until the next major update. It is unfinished. And if I were to describe the state that it's in right now, I would say it's much closer to an alpha state than a beta state. And what do I mean when I say those terms? Because those terms have kind of ceased to have a real meaning as game development has gone on, and even the term beta has largely lost a lot of the meaning that it once had. When I say that a game is in alpha, I mean that its core gameplay loops exist and are implemented, but basically all of the other supporting systems that are meant to take the game's core loops and wrap them into something more full, more diverse, more interesting, or even to fit into sort of a broad of a genre as MMO, don't exist yet. The game doesn't have group finders. It has guilds only very marginally, but you can only add people to guilds that you actually meet in person. There's no looking for group. There's no global chat. There's no local chat. There's basically nothing that you need to actually have an MMO. All you really have are the core gameplay loops. And that's what I mean when I say the game is basically still in alpha. The things that you need to play some of the subclasses exist. And that's mostly it, especially when you looked at the game as it existed in its pure launch state before the first set of updates, and there really wasn't even an end game at all. Like, there was Arboret, but there was no reason to fight him. It was just kind of a thing you could do if you felt like using all of that gear that you worked for, right? There was no real point to it. And I don't think that really matters all that much for the people looking at it on Steam and looking at it as an early access product. Because when you look at games that primarily launch on Steam and their statistics as they go from early access to launch to get major updates, generally you see big populations coming back for each of those big major updates. You see big populations coming back for a full game launch, etc. However, Oculus doesn't have that same luxury. Now, I don't know what this game looks like from the Oculus store, because I don't know what it looks like from the Quest store, specifically, because I don't have a Quest to look at that on. I have an Index, so I can look at it on the Oculus store, however, and on the Oculus store, it just looks like any other game. The store page listing for Zenith just looks like a whole regular game that you could buy and play, and that is not good, because I think it sets expectations for this game that people buying it on the platform that people are most going to be buying it on, assuming that Quest 2 also doesn't have any indicators that it's in some kind of an early access, should have. It doesn't indicate that this is not the final state of the game anywhere on that page. It doesn't indicate that you're buying into a game that still is a year, 2 years, 3 years probably from being feature complete. And that's a real problem, because I don't know and can't really tell you if a lot of those people who bought it there initially are gonna come back when the game reaches those bigger milestones, because it may or may not have been clear to them that this was the final state of the game. And that also is a double-edged, or a really big problem, because there's no telling if those people walked away from the game after experiencing it for the first bit, just thinking it was absolute garbage based off of, all of the placeholders, items, placeholder quests, placeholder this, that, and the other thing, and just walked away with a really bad impression of the game, not realizing that this is not intended to be the full launch state of the game, not realizing that that awful looking gray at the bottom of the city is not intended to be how the final version will look. Not realizing, if you're on an index like I am, that there is no way to reset your standing height, which is why you see these spheres here, because I'm sitting down in an attempt to limit head bob while I'm doing this sort of session here. That's not good. And I will admit that that is somewhat a problem with the Oculus storefront, but I don't think that gives the developers who released it onto that just carte blanche to say, well, there's nothing we can do about it. Because I think that this game needed longer in the oven. It needed audiences like, say, Kickstarter backers, or a limited release. And by limited release, I say release only onto Steam, because Steam is always going to represent a reasonably small part of the platform playing this game. The majority of your players are almost certainly going to be Quest Store players exclusively. I would not be surprised if that accounts for something like 80 to 90% of the audience playing this game entire. Possibly not at this point, but in general, probably it does. So a smaller launch to only people who understood that this is not the final state of the game is probably more what was needed, so that those people could provide feedback, so that the developers would be able to have time to have that back and forth with those early adopters to refine the game into a better state. And yeah, I just don't think that launching onto platforms that don't make it clear that this is an early access was a good idea at all. Now, let's get on to talking about how the game has been supported after launch, because I think that's where some of the real problems start to creep in. You can't stop using your Essence Mage, Ultimate as an Essence Mage. Anyways, I'm going to ignore that. There has been, admittedly, some good. And I want to point that out first, because I want to applaud that before I get on to criticizing it. Because I do have a lot negative to say about the state of the game as it exists right now. But I want to make it clear that I'm not just coming here to rag on the game for no reason. I really genuinely like this game quite a lot, and I want to see it have the best chance of succeeding in the state that it exists right now. So I hope that a lot of the criticisms are taken in that spirit. So the positives about what has changed since the game has come out is that you do now have a reason to engage with the world boss, to have some sort of endgame content to go for. And that's good, generally, I would say. Having that incentive is important, and having those endgame loops is vital. They need to be more robust than they are presently. They need to have more going on in that sort of arena. But that it is what it is right now is a positive change, because in the initial launch state of the game, Arboret just kind of existed, and you could go do it, but there was no real reason to. It was just like, man, I've got all this fancy gear lying around. I might as well try and get some people to go kill him. But there really wasn't a reason to do it. But now there is, to get essences of Arbret for getting the last couple of these upgraded, or super launchers, not these, because these are not the Omega launchers. And I don't really want to grind for the Omega launchers, and I'll get to a bit of talking about that in a second. But that is a good change. Now, let's go ahead and move on to the negative changes. And I think that talking about why I don't really want to grind for the top tier gear kind of ties into that. Because, well, I mean, A, there's nothing to use it on, and there's no guarantee that there ever will be anything to use it on. So that's problem number A, right? But problem number B is that actually getting the stuff to upgrade that equipment is almost impossible now. Because to get equipment past level 8, you need magic level dust, which is only really something you can get from sort of the world mini-bosses like the Sharkmen, but doing those on your own as a result of, let's bring it back, to the updates that have significantly weakened how strong you are in lower level areas, make it very difficult to do a lot of those on your own. And before you say, well, I can do it on my own, well, yes, I'm sure a person who finds every level, doing the hardest level on Beat Saber plus Ultimate very easy, I'm sure that you can. But for the rest of us plebeians who are mere mortals within our realm, it's very, very difficult, if not nigh on impossible, to do a lot of those fights solo now. And that, I think, is not a good change because of what I mentioned earlier. The game lacks almost every sort of multiplayer feature that you need in a game like this to actually get people to group up to accomplish things. Can you get people together to do Arbra and invasions? Yeah, there are generally groups grinding to do that at any given point in time, and that's not that big of a problem. But getting people to, say, go grind for magic dust for a few hours, well, that's not something you're really going to be able to do. So all you've really done is taken away the ability for people to accomplish that on their own, when doing it on your own is the only real way to much accomplish it with the social features that exist in the game right now. And that's, I think, somewhat myopic. Now, I understand the reason that you would do that, right? Because hypothetically, in a game based around social play, allowing people to do what is more or less a part of the endgame on their own sounds bad. Until you take into account all of the things that I mentioned earlier. The fact that grouping and doing things with other people is very difficult, if not nigh on impossible, for anything except the major endgame activities. So I think that this was a really boneheaded decision, and not one I think that very well understands either what players want out of the game, because also being really weak when you go back to fight lower level enemies doesn't feel good. It kind of makes sense from a game design perspective because you want to have those areas remain challenging. You don't want them to be pointless to a lot of people and to just be able to walk through them. I understand the compulsion, but it does feel bad, and game feel does matter. But it is more important that what I talked about earlier, that there aren't the wider social features to get people to go do those things with you right now, and you need other people to go do them with. So I just don't think that that was a very good decision, along with a lot of the other minor decisions. Another major frustration I think a lot of people had with the post-game update was the fact that the way to get legendary gear changed massively. Now, I do think, as I stated earlier, that change is largely positive, but giving people no notice about that change and just plopping in suddenly that legendary armor that you've been grinding for with the equipment that, or with the items and the event items that you've been trying to grind for them for, you just can't get it anymore. Suddenly to jump in game and find that that is true was frustrating for a lot of people. And when you found out that you would have to do it as a group and that the game lacks group finding abilities, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people just dropped out of the game right then, because, I mean, that's frustrating. That's just a frustrating experience for people playing the game to have, and I don't think that they really took that into account. I would have really have liked to have seen some other way for this to have happened, or for maybe a new tier of gear to have been added instead of that just being taken away, because I do even like the concept. I do like the concept of going around and doing events to get some high-level gear anyways. I think that's a pretty good idea, getting people to sort of tour around and participate in small groups to accomplish these things. That's good. I think that's ultimately a net positive anyways. So the way that the change is ultimately good, because it funnels people towards an endgame and provides a reason for the endgame to exist. The way that it was done, I think, no doubt frustrated a good number of players, myself included, because if I had known that that change was coming and that I should have been grinding for the legendary before that happened, well, I would have been. But, you know, I was trying to get out content about other classes and whatnot, so I just didn't prioritize that. And that's frustrating for me. That's frustrating, I think, for a lot of people. So I think that there are various aspects about the way that the postgame has been handled that are not great. And what can you do moving forward with that to be better? And I think the obvious answer is be more transparent. If you're going to make that kind of a big sweeping change that will entirely change what you've been grinding for and the way that you've been grinding for it, the least you can do is let people know. The least you can do is make your audience aware of those changes that are coming. I think that is very important to be more open and communicative in general. And things like PTR, which I do believe they have a PTR now. So they've already taken the right steps to accomplishing that in the first place. And that's good. That's absolutely a positive. And it's good to see them doing that. So I think that's mostly what I have to say about the game's post-release content. I'll talk more about in a bit where I think the game needs to go from now and what post-launch content needs to look like from this point going forward. But I want to talk a little bit about subclasses before I get to that, because I've played every subclass reasonably extensively at this point, and I think that subclasses are somewhat flawed in their design for the most part. And what do I mean when I say that? Well, I think that when you look at subclasses, what they need to do is exemplified by the tank essence mage, because all of the Blade Master subclasses don't change up the rhythms of combat for Blade Master in any meaningful way. You're hitting your cadences in the same way. You're hitting your master strikes in the same way. You're using Armbreaker on basically every subclass. Those are all problems, but again, I think the big central problem is that the core rhythms of play do not change in any real meaningful capacity. No one ability becomes prioritized more. The way that your blades work don't change. The tank subclass for the Essence Mage is the ideal for what subclasses should look like, because the tank subclass completely changes the way that the Essence Mage works, even getting a different main weapon to use. It's the only subclass for which that's true. Now, you could say that the support Essence Mage technically also gets a different weapon, and that's sort of kind of true, but not really. It still basically fires bolts like this. They do function in a different way, and that is still a better change than is seen on any of the Blade Master subclasses, and I will concede that. The fact that the bolts have a dual purpose of healing allies and dealing damage to enemies is a net positive change, and it is tolerable for what I would like to see out of subclasses, but even at that, the way that it uses its abilities don't significantly change up its rhythms of play, which is to say its non-neutral abilities still largely do basically the same thing, which, again, isn't true of the tank mage. The tank mage has a lot of ability to move enemies around. Their downward gesture ability that is unique to them is cast at their feet. It has a different way that it's executed and encourages an entirely different playstyle. They have the ability to guard, which is entirely unique amongst Essence Mage. And that's what I want to see with subclasses moving forward. Unique mechanics, unique abilities that still use the same base mechanics, but more significantly change up the rhythm of play. Playing a tank Essence Mage doesn't have you doing the same maneuvers, doesn't have you doing the same things. The only thing you're doing, technically, is using the same gestures to cast spells, but even what those do is wildly different. Blademaster has a number of problems, most notably having too strong of neutral class abilities like Bloodblade and Armbreaker that make class identity weaker in general, and also the classes lack more identity in general because, in no small part, that Bloodblade is a neutral ability, which should be a tank ability because, a significant form of strong healing probably shouldn't be available to the DPS if you want them to actually be working as a DPS and not basically sub-tank, which is pretty much what the DPS is. They're basically also a tank, but with the ability to output significantly more DPS if they want to because of Bloodblade. This is all a significant problem with the way subclasses work for the Blademaster, and I hope that with the Cyber Ninja, they look more at the Essence Mage and what was done with that, and realize that that's more the path they need to go down. Providing different weapons, providing different entire ways that the gestures actually deliver their abilities. And I think that you could see that with the Blademaster, for instance. Like, what if the DPS timing to swing their blades was only, say, 1 second instead of 2, or I don't know, man. I'm not much of a game designer, so I'm not terribly great at offering a lot of big solutions to these kind of problems, but I am good at finding them, or at least like to think that I am. So strong class identity needs to be incorporated in more subclasses than just the tank Essence Mage, and to a lesser extent the support Essence Mage I think also hits on its subclass identity pretty well. It's mostly the Blademaster, if I'm going to be honest, that has this problem. So I think that the subclasses definitely can work to meaningfully flesh out classes without significantly increasing development time on that whole additional class, but that focus on identity needs to really be there, and I think that's what the important thing, and the easiest way to do that is just changing up the way that their weapons work. That's the easiest way that I've seen them do so far, so I think that's a good way to point out, or a suggestion I make on how to change that for classes going forward. Now, let's talk about going forward. What does this game really need if it's going to be successful in the future? Well, I think that there are two ways that we can look at this from the short and long term, because I think realistically you're not going to get people to come back for the long term unless there is a significant update to the way the end game works. And I think having an actual story would help too. And that's not me memeing. The game doesn't really have a plot as it stands right now, so having one of those would be good and might get people more engaged with the game overall. But I don't even necessarily think that's that important. I think as long as the game is actually good, that's all that really matters, because I haven't read a single bit of dialogue in Final Fantasy XIV since basically I was like 10 hours in. I have no idea what's going on in that game, but I still want to play more of it because it's real fun. And I think that's probably a lot of people's experiences with it. I know a lot of people are into the story of that game, but I don't know. I don't really care. So I don't think that's really a key pillar of it going forward. I think that really you just need to focus on big updates. Capital B, big. I think if you trickle out little bits and dribs of content going forward, that's not really gonna do it. You need sizable updates for people to sink their teeth into. And if you're gonna sink back into obscurity until the time which you have one of those anyways, and small updates are only gonna get a marginal amount of the population back anyways, I think that big updates is what you really need. And what kind of big update can could get people back into this for a good while. Well, I know that this year they've announced several things like the new class, and I think they've talked previously about player housing. And I think that if you do make a good number of systems around player housing and significantly expand social expression, because I think if you especially bundle player housing with avatar customization in a more significant way, that would probably get people a lot more into the game as a social space, which I think is a big part of what needs to be expanded, especially since that works so well in VR. So I think if you bundled that together with a new big group of quests having to do with housing, as well as the new class, that could get people on board, not just for like a day or two, but for at least a couple weeks to come back into it. And I think that's really what you need to see, because you need space for people to create content, and you need things for people to get hype and excited about. And that to me would pretty much work, because I don't think that you're going to get the general audience back until there's like a big 1.0 release. I think if you look at the statistics for, like I talked about, Steam games in early access before, you don't really get a big spike of players back until that 1.0. And I think that when you hit that point, you've got to be like real big done. And I hate to say that I think that, you know, they're on a clock here, but they essentially are. Because if the release of Zenith has showed anything, at least to me, it's that people are truly rabid for a VR MMO. And I really mean that. I think that just about everyone with a headset picked up this game, and this game is broken and unfinished and lacked a lot of content that it needed, but that did not stop a enormous influx of players, a number of players that I'm more used to seeing in the traditional space jumping onto a game, not a VR game. And that's really impressive to me. But again, that doesn't necessarily speak so much, I think, to Zenith's quality. It does a bit. But it speaks to just how hungry the VR MMO market is. And with Zenith, I think, at least at launch having been a really resounding success, it's only a matter of time before people who actually have money to throw at a game see how successful it was and realize how much of a profit there is to be made in this space. Because I think there is a truly ridiculous amount of money to be made in this almost entirely unmined space. So the question is, can Zenith really reach its 1.0, the point where it has a reasonable story, good endgame that has a long tail which can really keep people engaged with constant live service style updates, before someone who actually has money to throw at the scene and can definitely reliably get those things out of a game to do the same thing? And I don't know, is the answer, honestly. Because obviously I've not seen any other VR MMOs announced, I've not seen anyone getting into the space, but I do think it is a matter of time before we see someone with big money, someone with a big franchise, throw out a VR MMO, and the first person to really get to having that sort of a big MMO that has great social interaction and a long tail of content, they're gonna be a billionaire. That's just the truth of the matter. I say they're going to be a billionaire like it's going to be a single person making a game. But you understand what I'm getting at. Like, that's going to be a capital B billion-dollar idea. It's just a matter of if they can get this done in time. And this remains still, I think, a problematic thing for a studio as small as Ramen is. Now, I've not seen any updates if they've significantly expanded since the launch, or if that was the purpose, you know. Was the purpose of the launch to significantly increase their amount of available cash to speed up output so that they aren't left behind by something bigger? I don't know. It might be. Time will tell if Zenith can really manage in the space that I think it has done an excellent job of pioneering. And I think that this has shown, like I said, that a VR MMO is not only possible, but highly, highly desired. So, yeah. I think that's really all that I have to say about Zenith for now, truly. And I hope you're having a great day. I have been really happy with how much Zenith has brought to the channel. I don't expect nearly as much growth or attention for a while. I wouldn't be surprised to see the channel largely go back to what it was before in terms of numbers, but that's okay. I'm mostly fine with that. I talked a lot about the channel update in the tier list video, but I think I'll take a minute to talk a little bit more about it here. I should have a lot of videos planned to go out across the next week or so, as I'm going to be convalescing from personal stuff, and we'll see how it goes. There won't be a lot that I can do about it during that period, but I do hope that it goes somewhere. I have really been wanting to get this off the ground for a while, and it's been really, I've been really happy to see that it's been doing something. And I hope that I can turn the numbers that exist into something that I actually can have a longer tail as well. The tale of me and Zenith maybe isn't all that different right now. Like, I need to find a way to push myself into high gear to really capitalize on what small success that I found as well. And I hope that I can. But I don't know that I'll be able to. Who knows? But regardless, I'm pretty happy anyways. I'm pretty happy that at least something happened. That's pretty great. Yeah. I've rehearsed this like twice, so my face is tingling at this point. I should probably see a doctor about that, but I'm not gonna. That would cost money. So, nah. I'm just gonna say the thing that I've said at the end of most of my videos at this point. Besides wishing you a good day and a good life, I'm gonna say boon out. Yeah. Boon out.